First item on the agenda is from me, just a review of the open meeting law. And I think every year you get something from the state and asks you to go online and review it. But I want to be clear about a couple of things, because I think we sometimes forget. Any member of this board can go out and gather information. And if you gather information that you want to share with the members of this board, that information should go through Kristen to be distributed. If there's anything in the information you've gathered that you would like to have deliberated, again, make a request to get it put on the agenda for deliberation. An email from any one of you to multiple members of this committee needs to be very, very carefully worded if you say or do anything in there. Deliberation is the key phrase here, okay? Anything that, you're expressing an opinion and looking for any feedback on constitutes a request for deliberation, even if nobody responds, okay? I don't think we've done anything that we shouldn't do yet, but there's a number of moving parts going on with a couple of different items, and we have to just be very aware of that, which is why we have things where a couple of you went and worked on your diversion for a while, but brought information back to the board for deliberation, okay? And that's all. And if anybody's unclear on some of that, the Attorney General's webpage on the open meeting law is pretty exhaustive to read about, okay? People reach out to me and ask me questions sometimes, and I have to give them very short answers or point them to something to get other information. I want you to all keep gathering information and forwarding it along and whatnot, but best to send it through Kristen at this point, and then she makes sure it goes to all board members and it's not.
And I usually try to take out the parts where I think this, or before I send them out.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff is very benign and innocent, but the sort of got this, I think this is interesting, this is a possibility for, or whatever. If you send that to every member of the board, that's almost, somebody could challenge you on whether or not you're engaged in deliberation. And I don't think any of us want to get to the point where we're playing the part of Fan
What
Willis.
if you do that and also send it to Kristen and say, please make this public?
I think that we need to take things through the board. So if you have something get it on the agenda, send it to Kristen. You can make the recommendation you would like to have it public, make that a request for deliberation and action by the board. Okay?
You can still,
That's a pretty narrow thing, but I think we'll all be smart to stay with that.
Okay,
you
but
can still email the urine diversion working group as long as you're not exceeding a quorum, and you cannot then forward an email that has an opinion in it to other members. So there's no domino effect. You can't do that, but you can still have very under quorum express opinions.
Yeah, I mean, we meet every 2 weeks, so
Right.
if something's super critical, and again, just get it to Kristen and say, I think we need to act on this, and we can always schedule a meeting by a Friday and have it on the following Wednesday, if we have a quorum, okay?
I believe it's also true that you can do things like sending a letter to the editor of the Enterprise
As a citizen,
as a citizen.
Oh, sure.
as a citizen.
As a citizen, yes, making it clear that it's not an official opinion of the committee.
Okay. Okay. Second item on the agenda is a sort of a quick update.
Chairman Rafferty, can I speak quickly on the open hearing law?
Sure.
Thank you. Matthew Hanley from Precinct 7, Thomas Landis Road. As everyone here knows, I've been a big critic of this board and the sewer project, but I also believe in giving credit where credit is due. I want to say that I've noticed a big difference under your chairmanship, Mr. Rafferty. I feel that there's greater transparency in this board. I also feel like there's more discussion between board members. I think that board members are encouraged to contribute, and I think that's important to the citizens of this town to see that different points of view and the topic at hand is being fully discussed. You know, when it comes to town meeting and like other public forums, when the public feels that their concerns have been addressed, it makes the process a lot smoother. So I will say that, you know, I do appreciate, you know, the openness that this board has shown to the public. I know in the last year, we've tackled a lot of very challenging subjects, and there's opinions on both sides of these subjects. And I want to say that, you know, I feel that the demeanor of the board has been very open and receiving those opinions, and I feel as a member of the public that our voices are being heard. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the feedback. Okay. Short update on funding opportunities. Kristen, you, I think, flagged out that the Southeast Mass program is
Yep.
opened up. I don't know, do we have a particular project that we want to try to advance at this point?
I mean, I spoke with Ed briefly about it from the urine diversion front. I spoke with Ken briefly about it from a PRB front. But I'm not driving any of those.
So I guess if either one of you thinks that there's something that's appropriate, maybe get it on the agenda for our next meeting and say, you know, this looks like a good item or not, and see what it takes to get some resources to put a grant application together, all right?
Okay, I just say, I think Kristen and I chatted, and I think we thought Ed was a better fit. Is that right?
I mean, that was your opinion, and I said there's no reason that you both can't.
I guess my viewpoint would be we recently went through that, it's the Natural Resources Council or whatever, where we have the PRB, which is one of 4 projects that the town's asking
Right.
for funding for in the upper portion of the LaQuake embayment. So it's on your end.
Well,
It's on your end.
just for
Go
a
ahead.
little background, because I don't think everybody got all the boilerplate on this SNEP, Southeast New England program. It's part of the United States Department of Environmental Protection, EPA. They've got 2.8 million this year available. There is a application workshop on the 6th of March. Letter of intent deadline is 4/5. If your letter of intent passes muster on the 29th of April, you would be told that and told at that point you can and should submit a full proposal. Just to give people a feel for the timeline, it's pretty tight. Full proposal would be due in June 21. Program requires a 33% match, which can come from any combination of funds. Urine diversion is possibly a good potential for that, but I think, you know, as a committee, we ought to consider there are probably opportunities within that to even look at funding for outfall studies and analysis and possibly construction and engineering and other aspects of the whole sewering project. So I don't think we should limit it to just something like urine diversion as a potential utilization of the funds. That's the SNEP program. There is also something, Steve, you've looked at and gotten some leads from Senator Markey's office
I'll
on.
cover that in a second.
You're gonna take it? Go ahead.
Kim, you're here, so I know that on occasion I've said we've got 85,000 and what are we gonna use it for? Not sure where we exactly are, but if we use that 80,000 on a SNEP, I always mess this up, a SNEP grant, that turns that 80,000 into a much bigger number. So depending upon where we get to in the next near future, we might be reaching out to you for a conversation about, you know, how you feel about leveraging that money to go from 80 to say 200 or 250 or something like that. you know, and if that's
And-
reasonable or acceptable.
And also, I think that 25% match doesn't have to be monetary. I think
You
you
can
can
count
count
some other-
personnel, volunteers,
Yeah.
rated as a different thing, so.
But I think there's some weight if you say, we've got X dollars,
Right,
and then, you know,
oh, for sure, but I'm just
you know,
saying.
X hours of Kristen's time or X hours of Amy's time are going towards that, you know, or whatever. It's just, I just think it makes it slightly stronger.
Oh, I agree, but I'm just saying, if it gets down near the wire and we're trying to cobble something together, volunteer hours rated at a pitifully low
I'm with you.
thing, but it's there.
Yeah, if it's 33%, right?
33% match.
33%. So you can put this together and say, we got X dollars from this hard appropriation, and we got Y dollars, and then that becomes the 33%, and then you leverage it. from
Yep.
there.
Right, so it could include time of Kristen, time of people at Mass Tech. Let's say if we were doing urine diversion and they were gonna be part of this, their salaries. If I was involved, my time at the 85 cents an hour I got when I first started working for Friendly Ice Cream, and, you know, Kim at $1.380 an hour, whoever, citizen volunteer time can also be part of that. So you can take that 80, add maybe another 20, 30, 40 of that kind of time, and suddenly, you know, you're in the $300,000-400,000 potential. But it's, you know, there's only 2.8 million for the whole southeast region. It covers the Cape to Pleasant Bay and up to Plymouth and that part of the thing. So it's a potential. I think it's worth studying some more. There's a lot of reading in there, and anybody that hasn't got it and wants it, I'm sure Kristen can send the SNP guidelines to everybody, so, if she hasn't already.
Thank you. Second sort of item under funding opportunities, I recently got an inquiry from somebody, because I had made a statement about the fact that the state had modified their credits for Title V upgrades. And so I thought I'd kind of walk everybody through where we're at, but effective January 1st, 2023, the state will offer up to 60% of the design and construction costs, up to a maximum of $4,000 per tax year and $18,000 total. And unused credits can be carried for 6 years to access that money.
This is per homeowner.
This is per homeowner, yep. And the kicker in that is that basically you have to be in a situation where you're told that your Title V system is no longer acceptable and go forward. Now, Amy, I believe you were on the phone call when we talked to Senator Moran's staff. Were you on that phone call? No. Okay, you were not, okay. Somebody was on that phone call with me. Kristen? No? I must have had it by myself. Anyways, when we were on that phone call, they indicated that, you know, this was really targeted at the nitrogen-sensitive zones, because it was being backed by senators and representatives from the Cape to get it through. So we'll have to watch and see how this plays out in some other adjoining communities that are not going down the watershed plans. At least my reading of it would say, if we got to the point where we said, you are now in an area designated to put in an IA system, the Board of Health would have to take the action to say, your existing system is no longer adequate for the town's needs and programs, and therefore you must upgrade it, at which point you would be able to access that tax credit, okay? So I just wanted to be clear on that, first off, it's 60% of the design and construction cost, so it's not
What's the timetable for this thing?
it's law now,
So forever?
unless they revoke it.
Right. But the point is, we're working on these watershed management plans. Some of them have potential IA upgrade areas. People in those areas would be eligible, it would seem.
Yeah, I don't want to draw an absolute statement, but the way it's written and the intent behind it, as I've been explained from some of the people that worked on drafting the legislation or the upgrade, is that it would be fundamentally available to people that have to do something to their septic system because of being in a nitrogen sensitive zone. You could be in another part of the state and
Understood,
have a Title V
understood.
failing, you could get the tax
Statewide,
credit.
yeah,
It's a
or
statewide.
Commonwealth-wide. I guess,
Commonwealth-wide.
or in Massachusetts.
And I think that the stepwise is that, if you read it, it talks about repair or replace a failed cesspool or septic system pursuant to the provisions of Title V. So it kind of rolls back into how Title V is written right now, and what the Board of Health would then turn around and say and do. Okay?
And it would cover IAs.
It appears as written.
As soon as you had a regulation.
The Board of Health
that
has-
in this particular watershed area, a plain Title V was no longer adequate. Therefore, by definition, your Title V is not adequate until you upgrade it with an IA, and then you use
You
this
have to
to
get
help
into
you.
the Title V a little bit, but the Board of Health would have to make a determination that, Tom's property is in a nitrogen-sensitive zone, and therefore the existing system is no longer adequate, and it must be upgraded to a Title V approved IA system.
And so if urine diversion is approved as a new kind of IA, that might be in the same.
They would get 60%.
It would get covered, too.
Design and engineering, up to a maximum of $18,000 tax credit. So if you're not paying any state taxes, it doesn't really help you, but most of us do pay some amount of state taxes. So, at least it's something, and I just wanted to clarify a little bit more about how that does or doesn't work for everybody. And the last thing I have under sort of funding opportunities is, a while back, I made contact with Senator Markey's office and their representative for this portion of the state, relative to some Army Corps permit issues that were dragging a little bit. That's gotten me onto an invite list from his office. And tomorrow afternoon, I will be part of a training session run by Senator Markey's office on the appropriations and congressionally directed spending program. In other words, how do you put in a request from a region or a community or, Barnstable County or wherever, under a group of programs, to then get into the budget? For, I guess it's called pork, okay?
Well, so I have an idea for some pork for you, if you would like.
I'm going to ask you to hold, I'm just going to participate tomorrow, because I got invited in, to understand the process, okay? A lot of when you read the stuff is targeted at fairly specific stuff right now, but I think there's room in there to start creating our case, along with probably other communities on the Cape that, there's an opportunity, in future years to start getting some appropriations to move in our direction.
Okay.
Go ahead. Because I've learned I have a hard time not letting you speak.
I wasn't
No,
going
go
to say
ahead.
anything.
No,
You
go
said-
ahead. I'm joking, go.
For 100% affordable housing projects, where they are trying to, in sensitive embayment areas, it would be nice if there was a way they could get some funding to cover the difference between putting in a standard Title V and putting in a D-night system. And, there probably aren't that many of them, so it's probably not a lot of money, but, it's expensive to do these things.
No,
And that would have political appeal, it's affordable housing, it's nitrogen, it's,
there's a gentleman named, his last name's Otis, I don't have his first name in front of me right now, but he lives over in the Wacoit area, and he's active in the Wacoit watershed and whatnot. I've had a couple of conversations with him. He spent a big portion of his career as a lobbyist in Washington, working on getting appropriations. And I've asked him if he would be willing at a future meeting to come in and, give a little presentation on, what the process is and how it works and so on. I think it's just good for us all to have a better understanding of how it works and continue to position ourselves going down the road. Okay.
Just one quick comment, not to belabor this thing, but, there was, I forget how many pages, 20-plus of stuff that you sent out that might be related to this, just an analysis of the thing, and I'm glad you're going to go on that webinar tomorrow, because, I think somebody should. They even mentioned things like planning an outfall.
Yeah.
is to improve water quality. I mean, it really seems to fit a lot of the things that this committee is working on and should be working on as potential for, hey, let's see if there's any federal pork out there that fits and can help us out. It would be great.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Otis got a hold of me initially, and his thing was, you know, why has Falmouth not gone after targeted appropriations? And I said, well, I'm not the finance director, and I can't, you know, speak to what previous finance directors have done, but how does one go after targeted appropriations? He says, well, you have to do this, and you have to do that. And I managed to get myself into the webinar, learn a little bit more. And I asked him if he'd be willing to come and talk to us almost. I think to the extent we get more educated and more knowledgeable, then we can, again, ask for things that we don't know that we can get. Go ahead.
In the spirit of what you were saying, I have something I can say about possible funding for urine diversion, which I could either say now, or I could say it during reports of members and staff, or you could put it on the agenda for a future meeting.
Oh, it's about, it has to do with funding.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's update on funding opportunities, yeah.
Since I've been making a lot of noise about why doesn't the county pay for this, I thought it would be reasonable for me to look into that. So I spoke recently to a gentleman named Owen Fletcher, who is an attorney and the clerk to the County Assembly of Delegates, which is the legislative branch of the county government. He also taught me what you all may know that I didn't realize, is that that's the legislative branch. The Board of Commissioners is the head of the executive branch, analogous to the president or the governor. And the county commission is the body of that executive branch, and the Mass Tech Center reports to them as a subset. And I said, you know, there's a lot of interest locally in urine diversion, but any developments in it would apply to the whole Cape. And he immediately understood what he was saying, what I was saying, and suggested that I send an email to him and with a copy to Daniel Gessen, who is our representative to that legislative branch. And I said, there's also interest from Mashpee and possibly Sandwich, and that one of my colleagues knows about. And he said, get the colleague to send a similar email to them with a copy to him. And that it would move along and see what would happen. And that if necessary, we could even make a presentation to the Assembly of Delegates. So,
I like the sound of it. I'm going to move on to item 3. I see we have one of Falmouth's most noted citizens, guy who, what, 15, 20 years you now been working on agriculture? Huh?
15 or 20 years.
15 or 20 years, and, you know, I'm not sure we would even be, even though we're not very far on the road yet, I will say we are on a road and we've made progress, and I personally want to thank you for your passion and commitment.
Thank you. Thanks for supporting, helping make it happen.
Kristen, a mouse click will move us,
Right arrow or mouse click.
right arrow. Oh, down here?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I can't see that screen from here, whoever's on it, so I guess I can look up
Look,
here.
look at the podium. It's on the podium.
Yeah, but I've got my notes on top of
Okay.
it there, and they're static. I can see it here, and I'll point here, people can imagine I'm standing up there pointing it. Some years ago, Matt will tell you, it was quite a few years ago, we got started on planning for this project. One of the big problems has been where to site it, and this is a more distant view, just sort of to get you oriented. This is Minot, and of course Seacoast Shores and Washburn Island. And they're located along here, and I've blown that picture up to where you can see Matt's set up down here, one in here, and one there. And each of these, I put that up partly so you could get an idea of the size involved. Each plot is only half an acre. There's 3 of these, so we're talking about only an acre and a half of production area. So it's a very small part of the spatial area of any estuary, wherever you were going to put them. Now, what happened when we started? 2020 was the start year. And you notice it's not up here. There was a thing called COVID that destroyed any hopes to have a viable, commercially viable aquaculture project that year. There were hundreds of thousands of oysters to be disposed of because the restaurants were closed. And this is a high-end product. It's a value-added product that goes out to restaurants on the half-shell trade, and there was no market for it. So I'm going to start the story in 2021, and you can see that we've had 3 very, very good years. Production of oysters was up about 50% each year over the previous year. And by the time we got out to this past year, about 2.25 times what it was the first real year of production. Matt and his colleagues have gotten really good at growing these oysters, really good at growing them. The nitrogen content is a ballpark figure, but it's the best we've got, a little bit more than 1/4 of a gram of nitrogen per animal. My guess is most of these animals at harvest, it's higher than that because the animals have been bulking up over the growing season. So they've probably got a higher nitrogen content, but you can see it's pretty significant. 178 kilograms of nitrogen in 2021, all the way up to 400 kilograms. And to give you an idea where that fit into a bigger scheme of where we're trying to head in town with this, I figured it as part of Falmouth's allocation to remove nitrogen from Eel River. I use Eel River here to avoid the confusion with Eel Pond, which is in Woods Hole. We've dubbed, this was more river-like. I've already taken the picture down. But Kristen informed me that this is Falmouth's allocation, which is what, 99% of the total? So
Yep.
call it the total. And again, you see the relative increase that's headed up. The first year, 5.5%, and then this past year that we just got the results in, about 1/8 of all of the nitrogen that we're supposed to meet. Now, I want to leave this table. I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes, but I want to tell you something else that's going on with the nitrogen that unfortunately is not as easily quantifiable as this. Each grower pays the town up to a maximum of about $20,000 per year for the use of town-owned resources. These resources include the upwellers, the grow-out bags that have been constructed, other physical aspects of the plots, winter pitting of young animals to be overwintered. And this cash goes back into this revolving shellfish account that the town has to buy hard clams, sea clams, to put out for both commercial and recreational consumption. And in 2021, the town bought and planted about 750,000 11 to 15 millimeter seed clams. Unfortunately, due to problems with the seed producers and us arriving late with our order for seed clams, we didn't get any. And then this past year, we got almost 1 million of somewhat, the average size was somewhat smaller. They were all the way down to 5 millimeters, which are very vulnerable to predation. And late last fall, we put 86,000 of these really tiny clams under mesh in West Falmouth Harbor as an experiment. It hasn't been tried before here in Falmouth, but it's 86,000. Well, I don't know how many are there now, but the crabs basically can't get to them while they're under that mesh. And then late spring or early summer, they'll be uncovered, and we'll find out what they look like. But these represent nitrogen collection too. The basic problem with hard clams is it's smaller. It's typically, and again, you see a bunch of different numbers, but the most quoted number in the literature is 0.22 grams per animal. It's about 3/4 of what a harvestable oyster carries. And it takes about 3 years for a clam to collect that much nitrogen, whereas our oysters are doing it in about 18 months. So we're going to stay focused on oysters. Now, Chuck has got a very ambitious program, all of what I'm gonna show you. Oh, I wanted to show you this to explain. In between the grower supplies the seed, he rents the town-owned gear, the oysters come out of the town-permitted aquaculture site, and then nitrogen is removed from the site. And then those rental fees that I just mentioned end up going into this revolving account, which buys cohogs, which are then put out and harvested. But we don't have any numbers on that because they're being taken by individuals. We have very tight control over what happens in the commercial sites, right? Everything is weighed going in, everything is weighed coming out, and analyses are done. But in this case, we don't know what's going on there. We just know that some nitrogen is being sequestered and being removed from the system. So think of that as kind of icing on the cake. The other icing on the cake, which we know even less about, is the denitrification that's occurring in the sediments underneath the shellfish beds. There's numbers in the literature all over the place. Ken can probably give you a much better idea of what those numbers look like, but you can't put too much faith in them. But again, I wanted to make the point that that there's more nitrogen coming out of the system due to the project than just shows up in the oysters taken out and harvested and sold. Now, I mentioned Chuck's plans. He's got a very, very ambitious plan to dramatically increase aquaculture project here in town. He's gone forward and asked for $400,000 for engineering, planning, permitting. Over the next period, he's going to ask for this money in the fall, if things continue to look good, to build up resources that would be leased to growers. It's not going to happen all at once, because what he's talking about is the potential, a more likely number, he says about 70. I'm a little skeptical, but I would say a more likely number is maybe as many as 30 farms with maybe 25 to 40 acres, but that's still a tremendous increase over what we have at the present time. And his cash flow modeling indicates $1 million of cash coming in from the resource rental and commercial revenues to farmers, to aquaculturists here in town, of about $30 million a year. And these are annual numbers he's talking about here too, with the potential to remove almost 8,000 kilograms of nitrogen, which he says is equivalent to matching about 1,500 sewer connections. I'll talk about that in a moment. That the town would pay $8 million for, but he made a mistake here. I'm pretty sure he means 80 million, right, and not 8 million. So again, this is directly from his report, but his idea is if he can get the funding this fall, and if everything goes well, the plan would have to have this massively expanded production in place in 2.5 years from now. Now, I promised to go back to that first table, and I want to talk a little bit more about the value of the nitrogen that's being removed. It's 178 kilograms up here, up to 400 kilograms last year. That's the equivalent, according to the Cape Cod Commission's modeling, at 4.5 kilograms per household per year, of 40 households here and almost 90 households out here. Now, how else can we get that nitrogen out of circulation, right? We can sewer, which is what we did in the little pond. That was a bargain. We'll never be able to do that again at $20,000 a household. I mean, that's pretty close, right? 20 per household. I looked at the figures and.
I haven't looked at it that way in a while.
Oh, okay, but anyway, I came up with numbers between $18,000 and $21,000 per household. So that means to do that equivalent of what the oysters are doing with new sewers at a rate that we'll never be able to do it at. Again, this was really, really cheap. We'd have to expend $800,000 here or $1.75 million over here. Now, what if instead of putting in sewers, we put in IAs? And again, the numbers are all over the place. I picked $35,000, which is a number you've seen. Again, this says that in our worst full year in 2021, it's worth $1.4 million. And last year, a really great year, it's worth a little over $3 million. from an acre and a half of cultivation, if you were trying to replace this with sewering or IAs, you come up with this. And then we look at our more recent planned projects, and Amy, am I still close with this 60 to 80 million dollars? I know you're not gonna commit to anything, but that's a range, right? I don't think we'll do it less than 60 million. But anyway, I put those numbers out, and again, I'm just, building a little town in the sky with these numbers, but if you put those numbers out here at $33,000, which of course is about the same as the present guess at IAs of $44,000 per household at $80 million, suddenly you're talking of a range of $1.3 million up to $4 million equivalent of nitrogen removal in an acre and a half. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out going ahead, and I'll take, did I promise questions? Somewhere here I did. Didn't I have a question page? There. That's West Falmouth Harbor, by the way. We can't be there today, but we can imagine what it would be like. Questions from the committee? Ed?
The seeds for the oysters are being supplied by the growers?
Right.
Okay, so there's no town cost there.
Right, and I should point out to you that what out there in present now is overwhelmingly the results of either borrowed or cheap or volunteer labor, because in the past, Chuck's been able to cooperate with the Barnstable Sheriff's Office to have inmates involved in site surveys. They love getting out in the field, apparently, in the actual construction of the grow-out bags. And just from volunteer in town, starting back the year before this was started, I've tried to break it out. It's impossible to break it out exactly, but I came up with over 9,200 volunteer hours. 9,000 hours of people, either, like we're doing right now, we're prepping new cages. Actually, sometimes it seems day and night. And the transfer, because the oysters are moved around too. So yeah, the town has some skin in the game, and there'll be much more going forward, right? Because he's gonna go to the town and ask for a lot of money that hopefully is gonna come back. But it's like farming. I mean, we can't say for sure what's gonna happen next year.
Do you
Steve?
have sites for the expansion?
That's what I want to talk about. That's the
Okay.
limit on Chuck's plan, and I can mention those right now. A couple of major limitations. We can't have floating gear over what the Division of Marine Fisheries concerns commercially exploitable bottom, which is 1 clam per square yard. They consider that a commercially, it's not, but, so we're very limited to areas in town where it's sort of the black mayonnaise bottom, the icky sulfurous thing, places where commercial shell fishermen aren't going to be doing it. One of the reasons that we're alongside Washburn's Island is the abutter is Webner, and if you did this other places in town, there's a bunch of people that are gonna fight tooth and nail not to look at this gear floating in front of their house. And people that use the water for sailing, or I see people water skiing in Great Pond in the summer, other things like that, are going to complain. The Army Corps of Engineers will not let you put out floating gear that covers more than 10% of the area of the estuary, of the navigable water of the estuary. So that again is a limitation. We can't carpet a pond with these floating cages as much as we'd like to.
Steve?
I've got 3 questions. First one is, have we solved the problem of getting credit toward a TMDL from oysters?
Yeah, oh, it's in our plan, yeah, it's been accepted by the state. Almost every one of them has.
At the rate that you're using in your table?
No, it's much more conservative than this. It's down at the low end of what happened in 2021.
But then that would be the appropriate numbers to use for your cost comparison, wouldn't it? Because that would be their conservative credit would be the most you could reduce your amount of sewers.
Right, well,
There might even be more reasons why you couldn't reduce the sewers, but that, you can't reduce it more than that, right?
I don't know, but there's talk of nitrogen credit trading that may go on too. In other words, somewhere along the line, I mean, we practice, quote, adaptive management. If we find something that's working and we can demonstrate that it works, the state, I think, is gonna welcome another approach, I think.
But there's a regulatory risk there, right? I mean, we don't know the answer yet.
No, we don't know the answer here
So I
to
mean,
this.
to be honest, the town meeting in the fall, if you're asking for an investment and proposing this as the return on the investment, it might not be the return on the
This
investment if you're limited.
This is a side thing, the economic returns on this, I think, I hope Matt will back me up.
Yeah,
on
I
it.
gotta-
The economic returns on this.
Tom, I'm good, let me just jump in. So whether or not we get nitrogen credits at all, okay? The model they've built is economically viable for raising oysters. The oyster guys make money, the town makes money.
I'm getting, that's my next question.
Yeah,
Okay, if you go to your first slide,
The one with the table?
yes,
Yeah,
what's the revenue to the oyster people for 1.4 million oysters?
they're not gonna tell us that.
You go to, as a member of the committee, I mean, there's a conflict of interest between the interest of the oyster growers and the interest of the town, because it's a landlord-tenant relationship.
Right,
If you allow regulatory capture by the tenants, you're not being fair to the landlords.
I don't
In
know
this
what you
case,
mean
it's
by-
the town. Because the 20K that you're getting is
Right.
the rent.
right.
But that's,
And it always has struck me that that was picked out of a clear blue sky.
It's completely arbitrary,
Right.
because the way it's set up, and I think it's 280,000 oysters. The grower owes the town 7 cents an animal up to,
Yeah, but I'm.
and that's a magical number, both numbers, the
Right,
7
I'm-
cents.
I'm
yeah.
saying maybe it should be examined, because Chuck has come to us multiple times over the last 10 or 12 years, asking for money, which we always gave him.
Right,
And he always said, this is the last ask, it's going to be self-sustaining from here on out. So it doesn't sit well with me when he then comes back and asks for a lot more. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've done the calculations wrong.
yeah, I don't know.
But somebody has to have a fiduciary responsibility to the town to make it as viable as possible economically for the town. With the growers, as nice and industrious and useful and wonderful people as they are, legally and ethically should be held at arm's length for that consideration. We should talk to them,
I don't know what you mean, they're contracted to us, they sign a contract.
but in determining what the contract should be.
Right,
For instance, if that number that I was asking for that you say you can't get is gigantic, then that's great for them, but it means you could in principle ask for more rent.
right, and that,
They would still work just as hard because it would be a negligible change to their net
Right.
profit.
and I think that's where we're headed once we have more than 3 slots available. I can tell you, because I was involved in drawing up the original contracts and regulations, is we wanted to be very, very sure that the project had optimal opportunities to succeed. The town held the permits and still holds the permits. We did not want a person to go out and get involved in this and then fail for whatever reason. It could be sickness, it could be mismanagement, because then we'd be stuck for some period of time trying to get someone else to get a permit. So
Fair
there's that-
enough
that
during the
rationale.
exploratory period. But
Yeah.
as you move into a not-so-exploratory,
Right.
more production, you have to make sure that your business thinking changes appropriately.
I can pretty much tell you that's the way it's headed, because once we have more slots available, it's gonna become competitive. Right now, we put more emphasis on getting qualified people involved from the start, and we put the financial thing, they didn't have to own the gear. their investment in it was the seed oysters, their time and their boats or whatever they needed to service these sites and handle that part of it. We did not want a situation where someone came in, say, from out of town with a lot of money and a lot of experience and said, well, we want to do this our way. So it's partly a control issue and partly a desire to try to make it less likely that there would be a failure the first couple years. And so far, it's worked great. I haven't heard from, I don't know, Matt, do you want to say anything about your experience with it, or?
Well, I'm not really prepared to.
Oh, okay, well, don't then. I don't want to put you on the spot. But Matt has just done a super job with his. I'll just let it go with that. Steve?
Yeah,
or-
a couple of, go to the slide that shows, you had that nice colorful slide showing money in, money out.
Right, yeah, that's this one right here.
So how unique or how creative is this I mean, do other communities do a similar thing? I mean, I think the model's great in the sense that, you know, we're helping to develop an industry
Right.
that can employ people in the local community, and the costs are self-sustaining to a certain extent. I like the fact that somebody came up with this and it's working. I just didn't know whether, you know, there's farms things like this all over Maine or
Right.
Prince Edward Island for mussels, or whether this is, you know, really a brilliant piece of, like, you know, sort of private-public interaction.
Yeah, it's, in a sense, we were kind of lucky here because we spent a lot of time when we were trying to draw up the specs and the contracts and stuff in different towns. We looked at Barnstable, we looked at Marion, we looked at Nantucket and all. And they all had requirements that the growers that were using the town-owned bottoms, there were a couple of different approaches. They had to show that they had a certain dollar value of product in the water at a given time, or they had to show a given cash flow averaged over, they were cutting some slack and had to average out over 3 years, and other things like that. And maybe we were a little biased, but going into it, we really wanted to make sure that it had a very high chance of succeeding. We wanted to have very few things. Now, going forward, as I just mentioned, with more slots opening up, I think it's going to become competitive, and we'll probably open it up to people from out of town. I'm guessing. I'm not making any commitment, but our initial thing was you had to be a resident of town for at least 6 months before you applied for this. And the 3 setups we've got have been great.
My second sort of comment or whatever, it's not really a question, it's a comment. I know somebody who's on your volunteer list, they get emails about, you know, what the opportunities are. I guess I don't see often or frequently or at all, say something in the enterprise that says, you know, there's this group, they do volunteer work, we're always looking for other people to come join us. So I'm just wondering if you have enough volunteers or what the recruitment process might be. So I'm just turning it into a question.
It's word of mouth. When I'm out in the field and I see somebody, particularly somebody I know, I'll say, you know, you should just send an email to Shellfish people to get on the list. The enterprise has run some nice pictures of us out in the field when the sun was shining and it looked great. And that gets out, but yeah, that's a good point. There could be some more advertising, but just the fact that over 5 years, I got almost 2,000 hours, and that's just on the oyster project. I broke it out as best I could because there's other projects going on. They're growing bay scallops, they're growing clams, they're doing surveys for potential future sites.
I just feel like there's a certain population in this community that's, you know, volunteer friendly. They're looking for something to do quite often, and
Right.
I would encourage you maybe to do a little better outreach, even
That's a
if it's
good
just
point.
a little 3x5 card on the bulletin board at Coffeeho.
Right, or some kind of email blast. Good. Questions from
I had a question.
the audience? Ken?
So, do we know where most of these oysters go after their harvest?
Oh, that's one I forgot to mention in the limits, is marketing. If we have 30 farms in town, where are all those oysters gonna get consumed? And over the past few years, because I've been as far south as Florida, I've found Falmouth oysters in restaurants in Florida. As far as I know, all of the oysters from here go out of state, don't they, Matt, that you know of?
Well, it's a mixture, a lot of them do.
Yeah, most of them leave Massachusetts because there's been pushback from some towns down Cape that we're making it too easy to grow oysters in Falmouth. And they're unhappy with this public-private partnership that we've set up. But most of those have been answered because my understanding from, and I haven't asked Chuck about this lately, but the last time I talked to him, almost all of the oysters were leaving Massachusetts. And
So their nitrogen is truly exported.
Right,
It
well,
becomes Florida's problem.
well, that was my complaint because in the fall, we took 100,000 oysters in mid-December and put them out in West Falmouth Harbor. Last year, I don't know what the total is for this year, but in 2022, we put out 312,000 oysters, 1/3 oysters just in West Falmouth Harbor. And I said, think of the irony of that. We're trying to corral this nitrogen, and then we feed it to people in Falmouth that put it right back into the system. But then the people come back with the argument, well, you're displacing beef from Nebraska or pork from North Carolina when people are eating seafood here. But anyway, it is kind of ironic, but a small fraction of them actually stay here, I think.
Yeah.
Can
And
you
you know,
say-
about 1/3 of that nitrogen is in the shell.
Yes, a lot of, I forgot to mention that too, a lot of it's in the shell, so it ends up wherever the shells end up.
Can you say more about these other Cape towns that say we're making it too easy? Are these oyster people or town administrators?
Mostly oyster fishermen that have come up to the conferences and stuff and vocalized.
And then they say we're creating too much competition for them,
Right.
which
Or
of
it's
course is
unfair
their tough
competition.
luck. But
Yeah.
are they saying that we're charging too little in rent?
I'm sure they would see that as a factor. I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't know the numbers, but
Tom, thank you for this presentation.
sure.
And
That's it? Okay.
I know that you got put on the spot a little bit to pull it together, but I think it's very helpful in
Yeah.
the conversation.
Okay. So how do I turn this one off?
I'm coming.
All right, I'll let you do the housekeeping, the lectern keeping.
The next item on our agenda is in response to several inquiries as we started looking at a couple of the watersheds about what happens with sea level, is that going to change the equation? Is anybody considering that? How we factor that into the watersheds? And Kristen has become very, very astute at GIS data and mapping information in, and has a little presentation for us.
Okay, so some of this is recycled from a presentation I gave about 2 years ago, but because the conversation comes up, I think it's good to review it. So a little bit about sea level rise. The last prediction from NOAA was published in February of 2022. The prediction for 2050 for the Northeast is a minimum rise between 12 and 19 inches by 2050. So that follows the intermediate high scenario. That's what they're predicting we are currently in. So that's this teal bar that you see the trajectory. This is from the Resilient Massachusetts report. So that additional 12 to 19 inches comes on top of the 1 foot rise that has occurred since 1930. So the record started down here at the bottom of the green line. We're kind of, 2020, we're kind of in this range, so you can see how the predicted trajectory is moving forward. In 2016, a group from USGS published a paper where they modeled potential effects of sea level rise on the depth to groundwater elevation, to the water table. It's a very dense paper. It's, because it's all modeling, they identified the limitations of the model, assumptions in the model, but what they're trying to come at is showing how groundwater elevations will change with sea level rise. It's not a linear relationship. It's not one-to-one. So this quote here basically is saying that there's several factors that will impact how the groundwater changes, including the land surface altitude, surface water drainages, so your lakes, ponds, rivers, estuaries, coastal geometry, and the position of the freshwater and saltwater interface. So the image on the right here is part of a figure from that paper where they basically did a cross-section of different areas on the Cape, showing what the difference between the land altitude and your groundwater elevation and bedrock look like. So here, this is going north to south. This is Cape Cod Bay. You've got Great Pond, Wacoit Bay, and Nantucket Sound. So you can see how the elevation and land, the altitudes change. And this line here, between the gray and the purple, that's the saltwater interface, saltwater freshwater interface. So you can see it's not uniform. So every location will respond differently to sea level rise. It's not a one size fits all. But when you're trying to generalize, the model predicts that with 2 feet of sea level rise, and this was above 2011 conditions, so we're already half a foot above 2011, there will be a median increase in the water table elevation of about a half a foot for the Sagamore lens. So they're saying about 25% the height of sea level increase is how the groundwater elevation is going to change on average.
Kristen, can I ask a quick question? while you
Sure.
get there? If that schematic, obviously the vertical scale is extremely accentuated to make the point, otherwise everything would just be parallel line. But what it implies is, we're not talking about fresh water for drinking and the level in Long Pond and all that. We're just talking about the water table for septics.
Yes,
So the boundary between the green saltwater and the blue freshwater is irrelevant.
pretty much. What's
So
important for this,
the bumpiness of that right there is irrelevant and is much more than the bumpiness that I can't even see in the actual water table. Is that
but
correct?
this bumpiness here may impact what this actual height number is, because where that interface is, the different pressures between the different densities of water may push your water table higher than in a space where you have a deeper saltwater, freshwater interface. That is beyond my pay grade. That's a USGS question.
But you agree that the bottom line is actually the top line.
For us, for septics, and what we can look at is basically where your land surface is to where your groundwater elevation is.
Okay, great, thanks.
So this was from a vulnerability study that was done in New Hampshire, and this is what spurred some of the map generation that's coming up. Basically saying that as groundwater rises, your septic systems are in danger of not performing optimally. So not treating bacteria and pathogens because there's not the separation that's required for that. Massachusetts Title V regulations. So this is from the state regs. Your soil absorption system is your leach field. And by state regs, the leach field is required to be at least 4 feet deep, constructed of pervious soil. So your actual leach field is 4 feet deep. The requirement for depth to groundwater, so that's between the bottom of your leach field and the high groundwater elevation, is a minimum of 4 feet. If you're in soils that have fast drainage, so a high perk rate, you need 5 feet. So what that's saying is that a minimum from the surface of the land to the water table, you need 8 feet in order to satisfy the state Title V regs and not be in failure and not risk public health.
Yeah, John, you sat on the Board of Health longer than I have.
We have just redone our home rule regs, and we've increased that to, instead of 5 feet, to 6 feet.
Wow.
So we've added another foot.
So we need 10 feet.
In critical
Falmouth.
areas. So that's the response that we've made to date in consideration of sea level rise.
John, that's just in spots where you've got a rapid percolation or in general?
Well, I mean, in most cave soils, we've got rapid percolation.
Right, yeah, I know, it's all sand. Zoop, it's gone.
So we're typically working with the DEP regulation of 5 feet, and we've simply said, in Falmouth, it's going to be 6 feet.
Wow.
In certain areas.
In certain areas,
Not
not in all
across
the
the town.
upland areas.
In the same sort of areas that we're gonna get to in the next couple of maps here, that, you
Yeah.
know.
So, from that paper from USGS, I asked nicely and I got the data from what they had modeled for the Sagamore lens because it was a pretty big study area. And then I worked with Cape Cod Commission GIS because my skills are not to that level. And they were able to translate the data into an image. So because I'm working off of the state regs for the minimum of 8 feet so that we don't really raise any giant red flags, the areas in pink are what USGS modeled, the results of the water table and the land surface altitude, where your depth to groundwater is at least 8 feet. So all the areas in pink currently meet state standards. Again, this is modeled data. It's not surprising that the areas in white, your low-lying coastal areas, are areas where that requirement may not be satisfied currently. That's not to say people don't put mounds in for leach fields, but based on just the general aerial topography, those are the areas that are at risk. So the next thing, that paper modeled several scenarios of sea level rise. They did 2 feet and 4 feet. They might have done 6 feet. What this is presenting is what the change in the depth to groundwater looks like with a 2-foot rise in sea level. So if we zoom in a little bit closer, the pink area is still current, so that's with 0 feet of sea level rise. Again, that was 2011 conditions. With 2 feet of sea level rise, the model is predicting that the areas in green have that minimum separation, that minimum distance of 8 feet. The dark purple, that's the surface water response to 2 foot of sea level rise. So those are areas that may be inundated from the surface. Basically what,
Just backtrack,
sure,
what peninsula are we looking at there?
I left it generic.
Huh?
I left it generic.
Looks like
No, this is near Great Pond. This is,
That's the east side of
It
Great
is.
Pond.
yeah.
It is.
That's the east side? Okay.
I think Kristen is worried that the reporter from the Enterprise will take a picture of it.
Right.
Put it in the Enterprise, and the people who live there will be calling up and saying, I'm in the pink area, or don't tell anybody, but I'm in the white area.
They'll be fishing from their front porch.
So what this is another tool that's in the toolbox to go into as the town starts to think about what they want to put in consideration for watershed plans. So just some,
I have a question.
go ahead, do you want that back? What do you want?
Well, the question has to do, and it's really, maybe it's an Amy question. So these areas that are near the ends of the peninsulas where they don't have adequate clearance,
Direct discharge?
well, the question is whether they need to be sewered just for pathogen control.
Well, the first.
So
level-
that's my first consideration here. What's the proposed strategies for areas that may not meet the depth to groundwater now and in the future, taking into consideration to continue to protect public health and the environment, and considerations to allow people to stay in their homes? That's a big discussion question. The next one is, what's the planning horizon to consider? Are you looking at just the 2050 sea level rise model, or do you look further out? The further out you look, the less confidence you have in what that model is saying.
For sure.
So those are the big
But-
questions that go with this. But again, it's a tool that we have to use.
But I mean, Because the argument from the nitrogen perspective always was, well, we don't need to worry about the end of the peninsulas, it's being flushed out there, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't help with pathogens, I don't think, right? Is that?
Well, we need to hear from the Board of Health people first.
Well,
What
we
the
have
heck
one
are
of
they
them.
doing about the white areas
Right now.
right now?
Not 50 years
I mean,
from now
if
or 20 years
nothing,
from
then
now.
that tells you something about the town's overall attitude.
Yeah.
Well, there are permitted types of soil absorption systems where you don't need 5 feet to groundwater. So in the near term, that's an option. But I think the other case it makes is that
You mean
in
a
dealing with
special design
a
of leaching?
special design of the leach field,
And is that in fact enforced?
Yeah, there's a system called the Presby system.
Presby system.
And because of the way it works, you don't have to have the same depth to groundwater.
But
to
if
get
I
to the
went
50
to
feet.
one of those houses at random in
They
the white
probably
area,
all-
would I find
They
it?
probably have standard septic systems at the moment.
Or cesspools.
Well,
Yeah.
So, Steve,
cesspools are now
yeah.
illegal in
I
Falmouth.
understand.
Cubies.
So upon the sale of a property, somebody's got to go out and say whether or not the system
It has
is,
failed.
yeah, is failed or whatever. So typically, when you sit on the Board of Health, people come in, property's changing hands, and they've got an engineer, and they've got a mound system, or they're putting a Presby in, or whatever. The Board of Health recently changed the rule on depth to groundwater, so more folks are gonna find that they measure the groundwater now, right? I mean, that was one of the requirements, John, when I was sitting there, that you had to do a test pit, measure where the groundwater was, and then work from that. So
Right.
that
Well,
would,
the
that would
other
drive the
thing,
system.
the other thing that seems obvious to me is in dealing with these peninsulas, gravity sewers are not a great solution.
No.
That low-pressure, shallow sewers are, on these peninsulas are much more,
And we did that around Little Pond, right?
we've done that in a number of areas around Little Pond, yes. But I think as we plan for the future, I mean, Seacoast Shores is not an area where gravity sewers are going to be a great solution.
What's the fractional turnover rate per year of ownership?
Well, what do they say? Real
Ballpark.
estate turns over every 7 years?
Even in these,
That's the rule of thumb, I
even in
think.
these
Wow.
locations? Because I feel like sometimes those people are holding on to their houses for generations.
They put it in a family trust and it stays there forever.
Yeah.
These are nice sort of philosophical questions, but we get a little bit beyond, I mean, the question was asked, is sea level rise change what goes into the watershed planning? I think the thought was, there's areas, when the question came up, I thought there was a sense that there were a lot of areas that would be inundated and would be uninhabitable, okay? What we've got in front of us says, there are areas, the purple areas, there are some areas that are, you know, they're going, something's gonna happen that's not nice over time. But there's a bunch of other areas where the issue is now back to, if you're relying upon a septic system, how do you get a septic system with the proper depth to groundwater? The ground, as we got at the start of this, the ground, sea level comes up 2 feet, the groundwater doesn't come up 2 feet, it comes up half a foot. So it's an issue, but it's not unmanageable inside the watershed permits and coordinating back, and the Board of Health has taken the first step already to increase the depth. These maps might get used by the Board of Health to better inform the areas that.
In fact, this is a fantastic graphic, and you're right, that Kristen's amazing with this. One thing you can do is you can instantly see from that is the pink area is a relatively small fraction of the white area. So it's not like sea level rise is tripling the problem.
Yeah,
It's only making it
you got the.
10 or 20% worse.
I was surprised when I saw this myself, that the scale of what sea level is gonna do to, the effect of sea level rise on the scale of the problem we're facing to watershed plans is probably not unmanageable.
Although this analysis is done for 8 feet, if you're gonna go to
The 10 feet.
the 10 feet, it could be different.
No,
it's
he
not
just,
nine.
John just said the town is requiring 10
The new
feet.
Board of Health rule.
Yeah,
It
we
seems
don't,
to me
we
we've
don't
got-
ever think about from the top,
He did.
from the
They
surface.
typically
We
go
think from the
5
bottom of the soil
because we
absorption
have
system.
fast work
Right.
zones.
It seems to me right now is one problem, and, you know, sea level rise, we can debate for a long time what it is. You know, for the last 100 years, it's been 1/8 of an inch per year per the NOAA data. That includes last year and the year before. To get to the 2-foot thing, that rise rate has to increase by 4 to 6 times what it has been for the last 100 years. And let's forget that for a moment and say, okay, here and now, it seems the areas in white are almost by definition failed systems. They do not meet the Title V requirements of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And therefore, I would think upon any transfer, you gotta go through all the gyrations Steve mentioned, and they can't meet Title V. So you gotta either be looking at a new, different type of soil absorption system, or tight tanks, or something else, because you can't meet Title V here and now in a very significant number of homes. And I like what you said, John, about maybe the only realistic long-term thing here and now, and looking at even 10 or 20 years down the road, is sewering with a low-pressure system, not gravity, but the, you know, and, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, we have proven as a town that the grinder pump thing works. It's a lot more economical than gravity, and it probably is the way we should look at as a committee and watershed planning going forward. That's the route, especially in these peninsulas where a good chunk of it already is not in compliance with Title V. And, you know, some areas now, like on the Vineyard and Ashby's, changed their setback rules to 1,000 feet from 300. Tisbury is requiring IAs already in anticipation of the state's reg. Should Falmouth be considering that to say, these properties are already screwing us up to a fare-thee well, their Title Vs are no good and should be replaced? If it's not an area that's planned for sewering in the next 20 years, let's say.
Amy had her hand up first.
I just wanted to add to the discussion that I would be cautious that in saying that low-pressure sewer is a solution for these areas that are very low-lying, because it does put the risk, it transfers that risk from the homeowner to the town in storms. So if we put low-pressure sewers through the entire area, and, I mean, it's not, I'm saying that too dramatically. It transfers some of the risk for that infrastructure to the town. So it's not just sea level rise, it's also storm impact. And it will raise a lot of questions about what the town's responsibility in the case of storms for these grinder pumps and the control panels and all the infrastructure.
What's the alternative?
The town needs to think about this as, it's, it's not just sewer, it's also water infrastructure and the roads. It will be more and more expensive for the town to maintain infrastructure in these white and pink areas.
So we should ban people from living there altogether.
That's not for me to say, but there's a lot of risk, there's increasing risk for infrastructure along the coast.
So again, the question came up before, and my sense was, are we throwing money away by sewering areas that will get inundated because of sea level rise? What I'm hearing the people on this board talk to as they're looking at this map is, should we increase the sewer area for other reasons? So I think it's useful information. I'm not gonna cross into rules and regulations of the Board of Health and whatnot, but again, as we get into developing watershed plans, clearly if you look at each one of these peninsulas has got a different sort of color scheme, you know, the portion that's white is different, you know, the scale or the width or the depth is different on each one of these peninsulas. So some of the peninsulas, the answer may be, you know, the 20-year plan might be one thing. On other places, it might be another thing, so.
Steve, continue. A, I think that everything that everyone said here tonight is correct. And B, the big elephant in the room is what Amy and Ken just alluded to, and that's that the town is unwilling to have the global, far-sighted philosophical discussions that touch on.
Not true. They've had, they had.
They had that study of Surf Drive.
No, they've been working on this. They just hired a resiliency coordinator there. Could they do more? Steve,
the-
possibly, they could do more.
I
But to say that they're not doing anything,
No,
they're
okay, I
ignoring it,
shouldn't say
that it's
that-
an elephant in the room and they're ignoring it, that's just
That's too
flat out
strong,
wrong.
that's too strong. But,
Flat out wrong.
all right, let me rephrase it. It's extremely difficult to face up to the really hard decisions that link into the fact that some people someday are gonna lose their property.
Sure.
Nobody is willing to talk to that.
So I operate from a certain philosophy that says the only reason for government to exist is to make unpopular decisions. Nobody wants a wastewater plant, nobody
Not
wants a
voting for
prison.
you.
No, I mean, that's what government does. It takes hard problems and does their best to establish what is the most equitable and fair thing to do. And again, we're gonna wrestle that through on some of these watershed permits, plans. Keep saying plans.
And I must, at the moment, the Board of Health has not encountered a situation where we can't find a permittable soil system. So even in some of these white areas, we've managed to either, in the extreme condition, you have to mound your soil absorption system. And if people's homes are, they consider them valuable enough that they're willing to pay to put in a mounded soil absorption system, that's, but we haven't been confronted with a situation where someone comes to the Board of Health and says, I've got a failed system, and I can't find an engineer who can design one that will pass muster.
So I think what you're saying, if I may, the systems are working even though they may not meet the 4 or 5 foot clearance. They're still
they-
working, so therefore they're in compliance.
Well, if you make them mound a system, what you're doing is artificially creating the 5-foot separation to groundwater.
Right, but you're finding are there systems that are in, let's say, a white zone, they test okay, they're functioning, so they don't have to go to a mounding, even though in theory, based on what the state requires and the Board of Health now requires, they shouldn't be working. No?
No, I think you're, so on a sale of a piece of property, you have to get the system inspected. You have to look at the description of the system, and, if the data's good, which by and large is, there's always the exception to the rule, but it will tell you at some point, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, somebody did a test pit. They found the groundwater elevation here. The Board of Health's agent have all sorts of information on groundwater elevations. So if the rule right now says you gotta be 5 feet to groundwater, and the data in the file says you're built a system and you're only 4 feet from groundwater, then you've gotta upgrade the system.
Is it correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
that's how
All
it
right.
works, okay? So people don't walk in and say, the system's working, you don't have to do anything. They look at whether or not the
actual-
system complies
Yep.
with the current regulations. Okay? All right. This was excellent presentation. It got a lot of discussion.
Yes.
We're gonna move on to item 5, reports of members and staff. I'll start down at your end, Ken.
So I will just report that Jordan and I, and we enlisted the help of a couple of scientists at the center,
Good.
met to talk about monitoring strategies, and we came up with some ideas, and I think maybe by next meeting I could have a little memo or something to circulate.
When you think you're ready, just let us know. We'll put you on the agenda to have a further conversation on.
Okay.
Good work.
Urine diversion, my favorite topic. Kristen did send to everybody my notes on a meeting I had about a week and a half ago with a company called Wasted. And Back in the 60s, that had a whole nother connotation, but Wasted is a small company in Vermont. They've been in existence for a few years, and they are at a large scale, in my consideration, processing urine. They are a licensed hauler. They actually removed 1,000 gallons of urine from Falmouth in partnership with MassTech, and it was the urine from the Green Center Pond Coalition test, where they were collecting urine in cubies. So that 1,000 gallons left Falmouth via truck from Wasted just a few weeks ago, within the past month. And they're processing it. They're going to process it. Right now, they have a facility in Vermont that is licensed, permitted to process up to 2,000 gallons a month. They did do 2,000 gallons from April to November of 2023. Now, they are doing this in Vermont. That's the only place they're permitted. They have a site in Quincy, Mass, where they store and transport, and a big chunk of their effort right now is in porta potties that do urine separation, to test the technology and to be a more environmentally friendly type of porta potty. They are ready, willing, and able to work with us and anybody to educate the public on it, to the point of even bringing a bunch of their porta potties to an event on the Cape, let's say, a road race, Barnstable County Fair, any kind of an event where they could have the things there, people use them, they collect the urine and separate the solids, and educational literature, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty interesting, because a big concern that a lot of people had, especially you, Ken, on the urine diversion proposal was, what are we gonna do with all that urine? This is what you do with it. Wasted takes it and does things with it. They are looking actively to expand and get permitted to process in mass and have a place to use it. They are permitted to use it on hay fields in Vermont, and that's what they do with it right now. They have a partner that has his own on-site storage at a farm for up to 900 gallons, so that in the off-season that we were concerned about, that's where it goes, and they store it some at Wasted itself. So it's an ongoing thing. They look to expand. They're looking to explore the permitting process in mass to process and also to spread it on crops. That's not allowed in Massachusetts. There is some dialogue ongoing. Steve Layton had reached out to the Department of Agriculture in the state. They're looking to have some meetings with DEP about the possibility of urine as a fertilizer product. Not allowed in mass now, not allowed to process it on volume like this, but it's an active conversation and dialogue. The other outfit that's heavily involved in this is Rich Earth up in Brattleboro. They process now 10 to 12,000 gallons per year. Our project, if it ever takes off to the 75 houses, would be in the order of magnitude of 15,000 gallons a year. What do you do with it? That was a big question from a lot of people. That's what you do with it. So the technology's there. People are doing it not just in laboratories anymore, but in volume basis. And, you know, I think it should go a long way to alleviating that concern of what the hang do you do with it.
Do you pay them or do they pay us?
I think initially you pay them to take it away. It's costing Wasted 35 cents a gallon right now at the scale they're at to actually do the processing. That's not hauling it away or any of that stuff. So, you know, there is a cost associated with the disposal. But as they scale up, and hopefully Massachusetts gets progressive like Vermont and learns from their experience and allows it nearby, turf farms in Mass, hay fields. Rich Earth is experimenting on other crops beyond hay for hay fields. They are experimenting with, you know, carrots and lettuce and things like that, and sweet corn. It's not allowed for human consumption.
Take a step back from the future.
Yep.
So
Here and now.
in the here and now. What I just heard you say is that there's a company that actually hauled 1,000 gallons
From Falmouth.
from the test center.
They actually went, to the houses of the people that had the 55-gallon drums, physically lifted them on their truck and
Yep.
took them away.
But in order to say what certain project costs might be for the pilot. It'd be good to know what their hauling cost was, okay? And then we have that 35 cents per gallon processing side of it. That would help to inform a side of the thing, since, you know, that may be what is necessary in order to
Right.
make it move.
You know, but the good news on that
And then
is,
the second question I would have is, Rich Earth, when you say this is permitted, Rich Earth was permitted under sort of a pilot, what was the thing, Ken, that was agricultural? It was an agricultural permit that we found.
Yeah, they were doing something agricultural with it.
Research, agricultural research under the so it wasn't a wastewater or a Board of Health type permit, it was very much agricultural, so you might be good to double check and see if they're working under the same sort of agricultural permit.
the Wasted kind of got involved in Vermont with guidance from and assistance from Rich Earth on how to do it, what equipment you need, farmer partnership, what to do with the stuff after you.
Sounds very similar.
Yeah,
to
yeah, well,
what
that's,
Rich Earth was doing.
Wasted learned from Rich Earth, they come to find out. It's like pulling teeth to find out, well, shoot, this is a partner Mastec has had for a while. I wish I'd known that 6 months ago.
Right.
So I'm kind of, pulling on these threads.
But you actually
When they were present here and we were talking
The
about what we
question
would
was-
do with this, and they wanted to go to the wastewater plant, we said, we're not sure that's an option for you.
Right.
It would've been helpful, they said, well, we've got this arrangement with this company, Wasted, and, it costs.
Yeah. How long this has been
X, Y
going
dollars
on
to-
anyway, but, the good news is there are growing capabilities to handle this product. It doesn't have, short term, it may have to go to wastewater treatment as you work out those logistics and they grow and get permitted in mass. And that gets into, equipment and storage and perhaps permit modifications that Amy mentioned a couple of meetings ago to do this at the wastewater treatment
Yeah,
plant.
one of the other questions I would have about the Wasted operation, that if you can dig into a little bit. My recollection was, the Brattleboro folks were operating as a nonprofit. They were operating as an evaluation test center. So it'd be interesting to find out if these folks are,
They are venture capitalist funded.
they are venture capitalist funded.
Yep. So they found some folks that are willing to put some money into this topic.
I'm gonna jump down to the
Yeah.
far end.
So, Ed, when you've said several times they're processing the urine, what exactly is?
They are, Wasted is pasteurizing it and precipitating out through, how do you pronounce it, Struvite? Struvite.
Struvite.
So they're taking the phosphorus out, and, they showed me jars of, here's our little white phosphorus, and they got like 50 kilograms last year out of their processing. Why they're taking the phosphorus out, I don't know. Maybe they look at phosphorus as being a separate,
It's got more
commercially viable
got more-
product,
More dollar value.
Right.
versus just the
Yeah.
urine.
Right.
Rich Earth is merely pasteurizing. So there is a company in Switzerland that actually I've found now has approved in a number of European countries for use on food products, a fertilizer that's coming from urine. It's called Aurin, A-U-R-I-N. If somebody wants to Google Aurin urine fertilizer, you'll get all sorts of information. They go through a pasteurization and a bunch of carbon filtration and separation to get it to a purity level that the Swiss government, and I think Luxembourg, Belgium, a few of those countries have now said, yep, you can use Aurin on your tomato plants and eat your tomatoes, and you can sell your tomatoes in the farmer's market. So that's something new in my search for knowledge on this crazy topic that I've been doing for 6 months, that there is approved urine-based fertilizers for food products in Europe. Also find out that the same outfit is involved with the Laufen urine diversion toilet,
Right.
or Laufen, however you want to pronounce that. And that has some certification from institutes and regulatory agencies in Switzerland and in the European market. So that may be a source of getting approval of that product through Mass Plumbing. But, there's a lot of work to be done in this thing that's ongoing. A lot of entities been playing with it for years. Some have failed, some are doing well. The good news is there is some viable options out there that seem to be coming along, so.
Steve? I want to second what Steve said and phrase it a little differently. I would propose that you call up Wasted and tell them that your purchasing agent is going to want, you think, at some point in the not-too-distant future, a letter of intent. In other words, treat them as though you were planning to hire them yourself to paint your house. And it's not a friendly discussion group. Can you do this? Can you take 15,000 gallons? How much will it cost us? And put it in writing in a letter so that if you're less tempted to say, oh, I'm sure we can do that. Because if you put it in a letter and then you can't do it, then we send it to their venture capitalists and other potential customers. We wouldn't actually do that, but
Yeah.
it causes them to be a little more serious.
The way I see this whole technology now is, it started off as an embryo, and it really wasn't beyond that point a few years ago. And now, I'll be darned, I said to the CEO of Wasted, I think you've brought that egg out and you actually hatched it. You're not crawling and you're not walking and you're not running, but you hatched the egg. You've started the process. To expand their scale to the 15,000 level, or to have Rich Earth do it, requires getting involved in the permitting in Massachusetts. You're not gonna economically haul this. I mean, the cost would be really high to haul it all the way to Vermont. And Vermont might say, whoa, wait a minute, whoa.
Why do we want?
Why are we taking all of your urine? Maybe they'd love it, I don't know. But I think it would be predicated on the getting Massachusetts up to speed to allow this in this Commonwealth for,
But that's good too. If they have to put that in a letter,
and they're,
that's good. Then we have that in a letter, and we know that that's something we have to wait for before we can promise to 50 or 75 people that we will reimburse them for their toilets.
yeah. My intent would be to get, you know, for personal knowledge and that I can then present to the committee, to get the several entities talking in a group as Wasted, Rich Earth, Mass Tech, and how do we get there? They have said they want to work and are willing to work and trying to work with Massachusetts. Steve, Leighton had reached out to Department of Agriculture. They said they hear about a meeting coming up with DEP on this. We have yet to hear anything back from Mary Beth Chubb on our proposal. Unfortunately, I was hoping we'd see something by now. I don't think, Kristen, you've heard back from the people on the those other grant programs, whether our plans would meet the watershed-based plan that they need. So there's a lot of things in flux right now. Is it gonna take a month? Is it gonna take 6 months to try and get some progress on that? I don't know, but it's not 5 years down the road. I don't think it's a year down the road. It's at least some months to get the Massachusetts bureaucrats looking at this and saying, you're out of your goddamn mind, or, hey, this can fly.
The Department of Agriculture is a very siloed organization.
Oh. Anyway, that's my report on urine diversion.
That's like Tom fishing for comments. Do you have anything you want to add, Steve, other beyond urine diversion?
No.
People you've contacted? John? Okay, and you gave your report earlier?
Yeah, and I just wanted to, haven't heard anything about it here in the meetings, but the Coastal Training Center at Webner is putting on another program the end of March on facilitation workshop for coastal managers. And the specialty of this thing is to get people to agree to do what you want to do. I mean, in a nutshell, I've registered for it. I have a little notice here if someone wants to see it, if other people haven't seen it or heard about it. But the registration deadline is March 20th. And it's an all-day program from about 9 to 4:30, I think.
Okay, what's the date?
The date is actually Monday, the 25th, from 9 a.m. to 4:30. I can pass this down there if you want to look at it.
I have a doctor's appointment that's been pushed 3 times that day.
Oh, okay.
Can you take a day?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Let me see what's involved in this.
They'll put some sort of meal in front of you that day, as far as I know. I haven't
Falmouth
seen the
oysters?
Probably, it's right there. Just go down and pick them off the beach.
How to run meetings.
Steve, a quick question. Do you know, have
Hang
we written the job description for the project manager for the $80,000?
No, it's not dead in the water, but there's been a whole flurry of correspondence between people in the Pond Coalition and the Green Center and Ed Santanto and the Finance Committee members, because they're in front of them tonight looking for support from the Finance Committee. So,
In addition to the $80,000?
yeah, they want to go Article 20, in on the Article 22.
Okay,
So
that's
Amy
all-
was away, and that kind of, that just got sort of set a little bit in the background to see where we get to with the Finance Committee, okay?
Well, there are two possibilities, right? Let's take them one at a time. Let's say the Finance Committee says, this is great, the town meeting should support it, and it goes ahead and gets supported. In that case, you would want to proceed with the 80K quickly to make sure that it's then feasible to go ahead, I would think. The other possibility is the Finance Committee says, no, postpone it till the fall, and then it would be nice to have used the 80K well in advance of fall town meeting to find out that, sure enough, we have people banging on the doors to be the first 50 or 75, so we definitely should go ahead, or at least that's not an impediment to going ahead with the 1.9 million. Or you'd find out with the 80K and really educating people, it's very hard to get 50 people, and that's an argument for fall town meeting not voting for the 1.9 million.
I can offer you a third scenario to the two you just offered.
Okay?
They go down the indefinite postponement and taking it to the fall path. But beyond what you can do with just the 80, you might be able to do quite a bit with a
With the
couple.
leverage, as you
Yeah,
said.
with the leveraging. So that's a little bit of like,
Fair enough.
who the person is that wants to come in, what they do. We'll know here shortly where we're at, but we'll probably be preparing a document that can be edited down or modified once we see how some things move. Okay?
I just forwarded everybody the workshop, the email for that Tom passed around.
Thank you. Do good. Minutes of the prior meeting. On the very first page, if you go down to the last paragraph, Ken Foreman voiced concerns about the fate of the collected urine, no problem. Chairman Rafferty confirmed that a consultant has been tasked with, strike the word evaluating, and insert developing a proposal to evaluate. Okay? We have not, we just reached out to our consultant and said, we want a proposal from you to evaluate.
Yep.
What do we mean? They're not doing the evaluation yet. We don't have a we've got some feedback, but we don't have a hard proposal. And we have yet to define, once that comes in, what the funding level is. Okay? Other than that, I had no other edits from my read. If there are no more, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Having a motion made and seconded, hearing no further opposition or comment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay? And the last motion of the night,
I'll move that we adjourn the meeting.
okay, a motion's been made, is there a second?
Second?
Okay, motion made and seconded, no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.